Welcome to the revolution. George Floyd's mother is suing Kanye West for $250 million for saying something that may very well be accurate, as you will find out in the very next clip. Allegedly. So let's go ahead and pull it up. George Floyd's mom suing for $250 million. Now, what Kanye West said is that he does not believe, after watching a documentary, it's funny that they're not suing the documentary because the documentary comes with receipts, but $250 million for saying that he does not believe that George Floyd died from a knee on his neck. Now, we've heard people like Joe Rogan say that. We've heard people all over have that idea in mind. And especially thinking from like a jiu-jitsu perspective. If you don't know, I train jiu-jitsu, literally choke people for fun. When you understand where the blood comes from in the neck, right? And the way that how long you have to sit on top of somebody to make them die after they pass out, after they're unconscious, and how difficult it is to stop the flow of blood with a pretty good blood choke or strangle on somebody. It takes quite a bit of effort. It takes a little bit of time, and it takes a lot of technique, right? You have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand how to approach that. I would be very hard pressed to figure out how to stop the blood flow from both of the arteries on both sides of your neck with one knee with the concrete on the other side, because your chin and your jaw would basically protect this other artery, and it would remain allowing blood flow to your brain. I just don't understand how that would work. Now, I'm not saying that this wasn't false, right? But you can make that decision by yourself after we watch the clip from the documentary just released by Candace Owens. But I think this is wild. I think it's crazy. And I think that this could raise a conversation that really, really makes the community wake up to what happened through the Black Lives Matter protests, right? If you don't know, Candace Owens just released a documentary about Black Lives Matter, talking about where all of the money basically was funding their own lavish lifestyles and mansions, paying off bodyguards who were actually her husband's business, and like $1 million or $2 million for bodyguards, paying, sexting companies and phone companies and prostitutes allegedly through the corporation and the entity for doing so. It's so crazy. So let's go ahead and watch this video, and then we will discuss it. Here is what Kanye West, or Ye, had to say about George Floyd, and then we will see what we think and if it was accurate. Here we go.
I watched the George Floyd documentary that Candace Owens put up. One of the things that his two roommates said was, they want a tall guy like me. They want a tall guy like me. And the day when he died, he said a prayer for, 8 minutes. Mm-hmm. He said a prayer for 8 minutes. They hit him with the fentanyl. If you look, the guy's knee wasn't even on his neck like that. When he said mama is his girlfriend. They said he screamed for his mama. Mama was his girlfriend. It's in the documentary. But something that hit me, that fucked me up when I was watching the documentary, and it said, they want a tall guy like me. When I looked at that image of him, this tall black dude with the bald head, he reminded me of somebody else. Who you think he reminded me of?
Virgil.
He reminded me of Virgil.
So let's go ahead and look at this. Here's the article that talks about his mom suing him for $250. So it says, George Floyd's family preps $250 million lawsuit against Kanye West for overdose comments. It goes on to say, and this is from the New York Post, the mother of George Floyd's daughter says that she plans to file a $250 million defamation lawsuit against Kanye West for suggesting that Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose, lawyers announced Tuesday. What you'll find out when we watch this next video, that it was in the trial for this, that he had basically 3 times the lethal dose amount of fentanyl in his system. So we'll see how the lawyer and the expert there tries to wiggle his way out of that with words. But this is not there's nothing that will happen to Ye as a result of this. This is going to get thrown out just like everything else, because there's so much documented proof from the actual medical records, from the autopsy, which shows that he did have fentanyl in his system on top of having meth in his system at 3 times the lethal dose amount for a regular individual. So we'll watch that in a minute. But it goes on to say that Roxy Washington plans to file a suit on behalf of her and Floyd's minor daughter, Gianna Floyd, accusing West of making comments to promote his brands and increase marketing value and revenue for himself, his business partners, and associate, which that had nothing to do with, and obviously hurt him, didn't help him. The 45-year-old rapper, who now goes by Ye, made the comments during an 3-hour-long interview Sunday on the Drink Champs podcast. Floyd, 46, died in May 2020 in a caught-on-video arrest by Minnesota police in which he since fired officer Derek Chauvin, who was later convicted of murder, could be seen kneeling on Floyd's neck. Now, to say, this was tragic. I was outraged by watching that video. There's no reason that officer should have been doing that. Again, coming from a jiu-jitsu perspective, that was untactful. That was unnecessary. You should absolutely, if you're professionally retaining people physically for a living, you should absolutely know how to do it without causing harm to them. And even in jiu-jitsu, if you put your knee on some dude's neck while he's laying on the ground, you're a dick. And you're in a professional position here. He shouldn't have done that. It's wrong. Could that have caused death? I'm not a doctor. I'm not an autopsy specialist. So take it with a grain of salt. I have a little bit of knowledge coming from a world where we literally make people choke unconscious with strangleholds for the purpose, of simulating this type of scenario. But he absolutely shouldn't have done that. It was wrong. It was a little bit too violent compared to what you should be able to do to retain somebody like that. He already had his back. He could have taken back control. He could have, easily put cuffs on his hands. They should have absolutely, if guys have a bunch of fentanyl, he should be able to take control of this individual, especially while he's sitting there pleading for his life. It was wrong. It was terrible. Nothing I will say here will go against that. But now, here's one thing that I kind of think is weird is that they said Ye said they hit him with the fentanyl. I don't know if that's accurate. How could you even have 3 times the lethal dose within minutes if they did it? I don't see how that makes sense. I don't know if I agree with that. I have no reason to agree with that. Okay. If you look, this is what Ye said. If you look, the guy's knee wasn't even on his neck like that. And we'll see that in the documentary footage that I pulled is that it was according to the portion, at least of what they showed. They don't show the whole thing. I don't even want to watch the whole thing. I didn't want to watch it when it happened. It's just terrible. But according to the video that we're going to watch here, it shows that it was on his collarbone. I'm sorry, on his shoulder blade, not his collarbone. Now it says that we will take all appropriate and necessary legal action if you, your attorneys, employees, agents, partners, associates, or representatives fail to comply with this demand. It said that the letter demanded that the interview be taken down from all over the internet and demanded that West not make any further statements about Floyd's death. Interesting. Now they show a picture where his knee was absolutely on Derek Chauvin's neck. Okay. Now again, your arteries are here. Putting the knee on the back of somebody's neck right here. Again, you're the only way to kill somebody. That's going to make you uncomfortable. It's going to make you pissed off later when you go home and you got to rub out your neck with a foam roller. But that's not going to kill you having a knee right here. Right? That's not going to do it. The veins in your arteries run the front of your neck right here. And so if you have a knee back here, it's not stopping either of those main arteries. And that's just this part of the picture. You basically have to stop both arteries to stop the blood moving through the brain and actually kill somebody with a strangle. It says that Chauvin also claimed that drugs found in Floyd's system were responsible for his death. But a medical examiner determined that a lack of oxygen and compression of Floyd's neck were the cause of death. Chauvin also pleaded guilty to a federal charge of depraving Floyd of his right to be free for the use of unreasonable force by a police officer. Okay, let's go ahead and watch the documentary because I think this fairly well refutes this claims, and none of this is like hearsay. This is all coming from the actual trial of Derek Chauvin's death. Or I'm sorry, of Mr. Floyd's death. So let's go how Derek Chauvin was the one that was convicted of murder, to correct myself. But George Floyd here, this is from the trial, Derek Chauvin's trial, and we'll see what they have to say right here. This is the medical examiners. This is the autopsy specialists, and here it is.
From the perspective of Miss Frazier's camera, it appears that Officer Chauvin's knee is on the neck of Mr. Floyd.
Yes.
Would you agree that from the perspective of Officer King's body camera, it appears that Officer Chauvin's knee was more on Mr. Floyd's shoulder blade?
Yes.
They had to have the jury believe that it was a neck restraint, it was the knee on the neck, it was asphyxiation that killed George Floyd. However, there was a ton of evidence that George Floyd consumed a toxic, lethal cocktail of fentanyl and methamphetamine.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, "I ate too many drugs"?
Yes, it did.
Let's put it in perspective. 3 grains of fentanyl on the head of a lead pencil, enough to kill you, enough to kill me. And so they had to continuously inculcate the public to believe that Derek Chauvin intentionally, premeditatedly murdered George Floyd, and drugs had absolutely nothing to do with it. As Lindsay and the toxicologist presented that awful testimony.
And you have to think, with the what was going on in our nation at that time, could you imagine if he got off, Derek Chauvin got off during that situation? Could you imagine what the public outrage would have been had he not been convicted of murder? There was already riots in the streets. There was already businesses being burned. If you don't remember that, that was so crazy during the lockdown that this happened, and literally our politicians allowed it to happen. So could you just imagine what would have happened if he got off during that? So to his point, they could not, and they meaning, the prosecution, the specialists, the judge, all of their careers would have been ended immediately. Their names would have been, written in blood on the streets, metaphorically. It would be so difficult to even imagine the mayhem. Right. And then you go look at who is funding Black Lives Matter is some of the very organizations that are being discussed by Ye or Kanye West in his remarks. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So let's continue this clip here.
Do you recall describing the level of fentanyl as a fatal level of fentanyl?
I recall describing it in other circumstances. It would be a fatal level, yes, in other circumstances. Had Mr. Floyd been home alone in his locked residence with no evidence of trauma, and the only autopsy finding was that fentanyl level, then yes, I would certify his death as due to fentanyl toxicity.
And they show a graph there of the fentanyl toxicity of 3, whatever the way that they measure that. I think it might have been like micrograms, 3 micrograms or whatever the measurement was there. It's not big enough on my screen. But he had 11, and 3 was basically the average amount that it takes to kill somebody. So he had 11. And I like how he says there, if he was at home and sitting there by himself, and had he, not been outside, then he would have died of fentanyl. 100% I would have said that. And he didn't say 100%, but he said, that's what I would have said, is that he died of fentanyl overdose. But he didn't die inside of his home, right? As if being in your home or out of your home has anything to do with your cause of death from a drug overdose. Now, this goes on to say, and I will zoom in here, the police body cam footage, let's look. The police body cam footage also reveals George Floyd's claimed that he could not breathe prior to being put on the ground. And I believe it.
I know I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Take a seat. I can't breathe. Here, come on out.
And then here it will say, and I'll just give credit where credit is due, this says the greatest lie ever sold, and this is on the Daily Wire Plus. So if you want to go find that breakdown, and this is the second time that I'm talking about the Daily Wire Plus here in their documentaries, because they've been killing it between Matt Walsh's What is a Woman and Candace Owens now doing The Greatest Lie about Black Lives Matter. I, for one, will go and watch that over the next few days and report back to you guys on it because I'm very interested. Okay. So let's go ahead and pull up the next situation. Although let's touch on this for a little bit. I think that's interesting. It's wild to me that he's now being sued. It's not going to go anywhere, especially once you understand what we just heard and how within the actual case itself, this was discussed and talked about, and that he would have, according to that medical examiner, he would have died if it wasn't already from fentanyl. That would have been their what they would have said would have happened. So, maybe being under stress and also having a lethal amount of fentanyl in your system has something to do with it, for sure. Definitely could be a possibility. I'm not saying it's fentanyl alone, but having that extra amount of stress on your body, or, stress, anxiety, fear, all of that happening while also having 3 times the lethal dose at the exact same time. Yeah. It's probably, if you had to say which came first, the fentanyl overdose or the knee on the neck being a part of that, it would probably be the fentanyl had a major portion to do with it.